Welcome to The Human Element, presented by Whisk. I'm your host, Barb Bidan, and in each episode, I sit down with CHROs and senior HR leaders to explore how AI, innovation, and human insight are reshaping the future of HR. We'll explore how technology is reshaping leadership, strategy, and the role of HR by sharing candid stories, practical ideas, and strategic perspectives to help you shape the future. The Human Element is brought to you by Whisk, the leader in agentic HR and creator of Harper, the world's first AI HR generalist. Learn how Harper can resolve up to 80% of routine HR tasks autonomously. Learn more about Whisk at whisk.com. Today, my guest is Jens Jensen, Vice President of People and Culture at ECCO Americas. And I wanted to get Jens on because of just how much restructuring he has lived through on purpose. So before HR, Jens spent 10 years as an officer in the Royal Danish Life Guards, and since then, his career has been one carve-out after another. He helped Maersk supply service into a standalone company after it was spun out of A.P. Moller-Maersk, was deployed to Brazil to stabilize a leadership crisis, and also led the business through COVID and a 30% cost restructuring. So he has been through a lot and lots to learn from. At Girteka Logistics, Jens ran HR through hypergrowth to 22,500 employees. He executed a 40% renewal of the C-suite. He created a shared service center in Tbilisi, Georgia, in 12 months and carved Russia out into an independent entity in 6 months. So right now at ECCO, Jens has concluded the successful closing of 75 retail locations across 3 countries as part of a broader restructuring and turnaround to work on enhancing systems integration both regionally and globally. He sits on a board of a fast-growing European logistics company where he chairs the remuneration committee, and he also runs his own consultancy on the side. So a very busy guest today, Jens. But this is one of the questions I want to dig in with you on today. But I also love the provocative way that you put that HR may be about to saw the branch that it is sitting on. So Jens, welcome to The Human Element. Thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thank you, Barb. I appreciate it. And thanks for the invitation. I look forward to the dialogue.
Me too. So before HR, you spent 10 years as an officer in the Royal Danish Life Guards. So since then, your entire career really has been turnarounds, carve-outs at Maersk, Girteka, and now at ECCO. How would you describe the through line of your career?
Thanks. It's a great question. And thanks for bringing in the military experience. I think there's a lot of, if you haven't been in it, there's a lot of perception of what the military is. At least I think I meet that often, but as an army officer, I think what we are trained to do is create plans and be very thorough in the planning, and at the same time navigate through real time where we have to pivot and adapt on a constant basis because the environment is never as planned. That thread is carried through a lot of my subsequent assignments. I think you have to do strategy and execution, and they rarely line up one-to-one, but I think the skill set, Jack, that I brought with me is they have to go hand in hand. You have to constantly revisit, does the strategy now match up with the reality? Otherwise, replan. But then you go back into the front line, and then it's about adaptation and thinking on the fly and ensuring that you course correct along the way.
That is super interesting. I think that a lot of people, when they think of the military, think of the structured part, but you raise such a great point that it's the plan and pivot, right? The ability to have a structured plan, but the requirement to have to plan on the fly in anything related to the military. So I can see how that was excellent training ground for the things that you've had to touch since. So of everything you've had to dismantle and rebuild between the Brazil leadership stabilization, the carve-out of Girteka, what taught you most about what it actually takes to get this sort of work done?
I think failure is such a great learning tool along the way. And so I think there's inevitably, when there's going to be some mistakes along the way, I think that's one thing. And conversely, I think success is definitely also quite the teaching tool that you can bring with you the experiences and the similarities from one organization to another. It's difficult on the spot to say there's one particular thing that taught me how to operate or how to be successful in business. So I think one of the things that I've just carried with me is constant curiosity and just being asking a lot of questions along the way, focusing on my own growth, not considering myself a complete product, but a leader under development along the way. And again, I think that carries through all the jobs, right? There's a lot of situations where I'm put in something where I've never done it before. And maybe the sort of like the Pippi Longstocking approach from is I've never done this before, so I'm sure I'm going to be successful. But there is also got to be some naivety along the way, and not always letting yourself be blinded by or let yourself be led astray by that. That's not possible. I can't do that. It's got to be a way of figuring this out. So I think the curiosity carries through and asking a lot of questions, and thankfully a lot of good mentors along the way in my careers. I had the benefit and luxury of reporting to some really good leaders that also invested time in me along the way. And I think that's probably the one thing now that I look for when I look for jobs and opportunities and careers. And I say, who's the leader or the leaders that I'm going to be working with, and what's their perspective? Because I still think that there's a long way to retirement, and I've got a lot to learn.
I like naivete, I think, does breed a level of curiosity because you don't know, so you have to be curious. Sometimes I think that some of the things we deal with in HR, it's almost better to be naive and just be resourceful and be able to work your way through it versus if you knew what happened last time or you felt how hard it was the time before, that would potentially send you in the wrong direction. So I love the curiosity element that you mentioned. So as the sort of most recent thing that you've done in terms of restructuring, you've closed the 75 ECCO locations across 3 countries. What's different about how you executed on that one compared to some of the others that maybe you did earlier in your career?
I think so the countries differ always. There's a difference to whether you're downscaling in Europe, in the Americas, in Asia, in Africa. I should say I haven't done the last one, but I think that you have to have some cultural awareness and, of course, legal awareness. One thing that's different in the US in particular is that it's a very litigious environment. So you have to extra scrutiny on your processes along the way and go more into the details. I think many situations we as companies, when we have to do these things, it's not because we find that it's a fantastic thing to do. There's more than 300 colleagues that lost their jobs as a consequence of this downscaling. And it's about finding what's the turnaround point that we are ready to grow from again. Because clearly along the way, there's something in our business model that isn't working. Sometimes you step forward and you grow, and sometimes you step back and saying, here's where we got to pick it up. I think one thing that I tried to push, and I think we were quite successful in getting in here, is, and perhaps I'm stereotyping, but often you get the perception in the US that we let people go with very short notice because of our at-will employment. And that often means that you inform people quite late. And I think that's one thing, that's a choice. And we made an opposite choice. Many of our store closings were in January. Actually, 49 of them were in the month of January. We chose to inform people in November. And I think we have to believe in better parts of humanity in that one. And we go in and we take a risk, because what of course happens is you now give power to the employees to counter-resign and to find new jobs. And we still needed them through the season. Q4 and retail is an extreme busy season. We need the store staff to be present for the holiday sales and also for the Januaries. But we choose to go in and say, your job will actually disappear after these 3 months. And I think that's making choices because it's the right thing. We sometimes forget in businesses. And I can say we felt the positive response both from corporate and retail colleagues in making this choice, because it felt like we treated them with more respect and more dignity that perhaps they would have experienced from another employer.
It sounds like you actually heard that back from team members, right? That it was notably different than maybe what if they had experienced this in another employer, or if they have family or friends who had experienced a reduction where people lost their jobs. They were treated better than maybe what they would have culturally expected in the US based on what others were doing. Is that?
Yeah, it's exactly that. We got that feedback, and because we've existed for, ECCO's been more than 60 years, for the US more than 30 years. And I think that there were many long tenured colleagues, and you have these connections across the organization. So you have to factor in, there's of course some people that fortunately have to let go. And there's also those that you have to thankfully retain and keep around. And how you treat people on their way out also sends a signal not only to them, where they will go out and be the ambassadors for ECCO in the market, but also sends a signal to the colleagues in the office. And it is also good business in my view, but I think it's also just a better way of treating people. Then I would say the result we got was, of course, there's critical voices and they could have been right that, hey, then a lot of people are going to resign leading up to the holiday and we're going to be short-staffed, and we actually have relatively low turnover because of that, because people in kind treated us with the same respect. And we understand it. Personal, it's a business decision, but we thank you for giving us notice so we have an opportunity to find a new employer and a new job.
Yeah, it's a demonstration that you can do hard things and deliver news that is not easy for people to receive with humanity and have it be received a heck of a lot better than if you handle it in alternative or less humane ways. Such a great example. I would love to pivot a little bit to AI. So while the industry is out talking about AI's impact on jobs and whether HR is ready for AI, you said something that I haven't heard a guest say before, that HR might be sawing the branch it is sitting on. Walk me through what you mean by that.
I think, first of all, going back to how I had the pleasure of sitting in different business positions in different companies, I've often tried to work myself out of a job. And I think there's a different mindset to have. But I think that if you sit in a job and kind of churn day in, day out, I just have a mindset of there's got to be a way of automating this. This is pre-AI. There's got to be a way of building a structure and a process and a system that I don't need to sit and do repetitive work. And it was a mentor earlier in my career, actually, when I was in Maersk and in Maersk Line, this guy saying, whenever I tried to work myself out of a job, I never got terminated. I ended up getting promoted. And it stuck around with me that if you can eliminate your own job, someone's going to see that and say, okay, let's see what you can do in this part of the business. Go in here and see what you can automate and standardize. I think then if we shift over to what do I mean in terms of HR, I think we still are stuck in the dialogue between what is HR. Is an employer or brand ambassador that does HR operational work, that is particularly in the Americas, very busy managing benefits and 401ks and work outcomes and legal claims and all, or is it a critical business function that's there to create results on the top and the bottom line? And candidly, I still think that 80% of what I engage in the market and network and so on, it's unfortunately the first thing. That's never been what I was taught that HR was about. Again, some fantastic mentors along the way had these analogies. If you walk into a room and you see the CEO, the CFO, and the CHRO discuss, and you don't know who is who, you shouldn't be able to tell who is who. Right? So I think that's sort of set the bar. You have to understand cash flows and accruals, and you have to understand top line and where does the money come from, what's driving the business. You still need your expertise to be founded in your function, just like the CFO does, but we should be able to have a discussion as peers. And again, going back to that I don't find too many of those HR people, not their fault alone. I think the organizations also pigeonholed a lot of HR leaders into a more of a transactional risk safety function. And I think if you're in that category, many of the things we're doing should be automated and eliminated. That's not the knowledge work that the organizations will be needing going forward. So I think it requires some risk and it requires some dare, because it may be that the majority of my job is managing these kind of processes that for many years have created the identity and the value of HR in that organization. I should be actively trying to eliminate that. And AI can play a role in that. And it's not all of it, for sure. There's going to be a long time before employee relation and investigation is going to be taken over by AI. But I think that a lot of the things that we identify as HR today, we should try to get. And here I'm not talking about outsourcing or integration systems should take this over, workflows, automations. And I think you can have that mindset. What's even my job content and how much of this could I get rid of? Then, of course, that's where I think AI has the value. But if we do not drive it ourselves, at some point, a business leader or an external consultant or someone's going to show up and say, "Are you still doing that?" For me, it's about being in the driver's seat and understanding what is it that could be eliminated from my job. At some point, there's not enough job left. And I know that. And then I just got to have this belief that either the organization finds a better place that I can create even more value, or, unfortunately, they will have to part ways. Typically, then they'll get some sort of severance. To say, sorry, you eliminated your position. Someone else out there can use that exact same skill set. And you can do it again. Now, wider, larger impact, big organization, more country. So I'm missing when we talk HR forums. And today I was also on an AI panel debate where I was listening in on it. I think we're spinning a little bit in circles in what we're doing and how we can do some of that. But we're not really taking the more provocative question, saying, how we set up an organization who need HR at all? And can AI help us get to that point?
I think that's actually a powerful vision and one that I've shared with teams before, right? A world where we are not needed, where leaders in the business are so well equipped to be great leaders to their teams and so forth, right? Where the role of HR becomes effectively what you're describing in terms of a true business partner to the leadership team, a business leader who understands everything that's driving the business, right? That should be HR utopia, in my opinion, and sounds like fairly close to what you're saying too. What about those folks that are in the roles, right, where they're doing work that can be automated and they buy into what we're saying here? Okay, I'm going to help figure out how to work myself out of a job, but they don't know how to lean in on deeper understanding of the business, that sort of thing. Do you have any recommendations for that person who maybe wants to get there to those higher value tasks, but doesn't understand how to get there if they've been pigeonholed into this administrative function? What would you tell that person?
I think there's two paths because also I think many organizations I've seen is become almost like praise and put the business part on a pedestal and the strategic HR is up here and the operational HR is down here. I think first of all, we got to get rid of this differentiation. It's all HR and sometimes for the leaders there, without the operation, the rest can't work. So I think if you sit in that situation, there is also two choices to make. Not everyone wants to be a business partner having the business discussion. There will be larger and other companies where you can go in with that again and really help them transform, standardize, and setting those elements up. But it may not be your current employer. And I think that's like going back to that. I think the days are gone where we had 25-year anniversaries. It's going to be very few of us that going to have that opportunity to get that gold watch or whatever we get at that anniversary date. And that's fine. And we as employers should also not sit and say purpose with the employees that we retain them for longer. So I think there's one venue there. But now, if you go back to your question, saying how do you get into the business side? If you want to venture into that, I think it's a mix between the formal training and education. This goes back to the staying curious, staying constant learner. And I'm not talking LinkedIn. LinkedIn is not necessarily going to give you that. I think it's a mix between you got to take some formal classes and courses, and they do exist. I think there's great business schools around that have these kind of classes where they put a curriculum together for HR professionals, but don't do that in isolation. Do that together with setting up a lunch with your finance partner or your CFO, setting up a lunch with your commercial leader. Get out there together with the sales. In our case, get into a retail store and understand what's it like to walk in their shoes. And what I found is that relatively few HR people even ask the questions to do it. And once they start asking, it's not like the business says, no, get out of here. Every time I'm shown up and think, can I join you on this trip? Can I go here with this? I'd like to understand. So first, look a little bit puzzled because they've never been asked before. And then, of course, they invite you in because they want you to succeed. They want their business partner to understand their business. So I think, again, it comes down to our choice to take the lead in, but not seeing like one job being better than the other, going back to that some of us love being in HR operation for the rest of our life. And there'll be plenty of organizations to do that in. We're going to augment it by HR, but not fully replaced. I think it's not just one venue that people have to pursue. And then it's going back to like, you got to find whatever kind of fuels your fire. What gives you that desire? Not trying to live someone else's ambitions on your behalf.
I love that. And goals for our industry, I would love if we all adopted a goal to create less puzzled looks on leaders' faces when the HR person comes in and asks deep business questions, right? That should not puzzle anyone. That should come to be what is expected. That would, in my lifetime, I hope, before I retire, that we see a lot less puzzled faces as we're asking business questions. So where, Jens, have you already seen AI quietly eliminate pieces of HR's own work, even something small, in your current environment?
I think we are not far advanced in ECCO, to be very candid. I think that I see it more in large organizations where we have uniform HR IT systems globally. One of the ECCO challenges, we still operate in individual platforms in each region and every country, and then it's difficult because you build AI solutions for every country. It's just not sustainable or scalable. The ROI isn't there to do that. But what I see in organizations, when you operate on single platforms globally, the success factors or Workday or whatever else is in there, or Oracle and so on, the first place is, I would say, the chat. And it's giving the simple answers to many of those standard questions that either comes on Teams or chat or email today. And it's really just about guiding people back to the standard policies. No need for us to sit and spend any time in guiding someone to how to, first of all, tell them which days are holidays, and second of all, how to put it into the HR system. That should be very much automated in the first place. And I think what we need to do is to then reinvest that capacity into something else. That something else could be different from company to company. But I think that losing organizations are declaring victory by cutting these jobs away, where winning organizations are reinvesting for more value-adding work. And that again goes back to, I think HR should lean into that and take the lead on it, because if we're not, there's going to be someone else showing up from inside or outside the organization. You're not adding value, and it's easy just to cut. So managing standard processes and procedures, I think that's very easy. The next step from that is it's more the augmentation or the enrichment of what we need to do. Simple thing again, we're working on right now putting a ticket system in. Many organizations already have that. The reason you have a ticket system is so you can analyze the data. So you can just manage the flow, analyzing the data to find out where is the biggest problem for the organization, which ones are repeated, and then having AI starting to come up with solutions for that. I think we're using more of that in the logistics company where I sit on the board, where drivers, we have 2 trucks driving around Europe. The drivers may have questions coming in to the dispatchers. The dispatchers already have pre-generated answers, and they look and just put a check mark that is the right answer. It saved a tremendous amount of time. We still have these humans in the loop, but it means that we can, one dispatcher can take care of many more drivers than they could just 2 years ago. I think HR needs to just look at the other functions and say, where is something comparable we can replicate into our organization? And then where we see the micro wins right now, free up that capacity, reinvest in it for more value adding, and then understanding how do we then add the next level of value to the organization.
Completely. And I want to shift into another big problem that you've tackled, or a big challenge. You've done workforce planning at a scale that many HR leaders haven't touched. 545,000 employees at ISS, 22,500 at Girteka, 54 countries at Maersk. How does that experience change the way you think about AI's impact on jobs overall?
Big part of our workforce planning, it really depends on which organization you go into, what that actually means. And I've seen organizations that goes to very great depth and lengths to understand how to plan critical roles down to, you want to start this role next year in April and this one in November. And I think the first step is to find the balance between planning and execution. And that goes back to this, perhaps my military upbringing, so to say. One of the transferable skills, or one of the catchphrases from back then, is that you should never spend more than 20 to 30% of the time in the planning, because you need the rest of the time for the execution. I think I've seen workforce planning in some companies taking 90% of the time, and then when you get to the planning, and then the execution anyway doesn't add up. That doesn't mean you shouldn't plan, but you should start with having a certain guideline for how granular do you want this plan to be. So I think that's one element. I think what's coming into workforce planning, and I've seen some organizations that's been really good at that. I haven't had the luxury of doing that myself. But if you talk like Lego, another big Danish icon of a company, what they do in terms of engagement analytics and how they can do correlation analytics, they can basically go into a team and say, Barb, you're a team. Based on the engagement results, you're going to have 1 to 2 people signing with 90% confidence within this and that time. So you can start now already either looking for new candidates or understand what it is you need to do within the team dynamics if you want to have a retained organization. And I think that if is important, because I think we've also many times in HR and often in the learning development area, we talk about constantly retaining the colleagues for long. I'm not buying that. I don't need people retained for longer. I need them to rotate through the organization at a certain pace to transfer those skills to next level. So I think it's also, that's where you can start using AI, because it's massive data numbers. It's massive analytics that would take us a very long time with complex tool in the past. Now Claude or ChatGPT or anything else that you see, you can throw it all in there and it's going to give you a very different analytics. Plus, you can ask it to criticize your assumptions. And then suddenly challenging yourself with the machine instead of maybe having your colleague say, hey, Bob, that thing's never going to work. So I think workforce planning is an area that's going to see a lot of growth depending on your focus as well. I think areas where I've seen it really are also adding more values like M&A work. And that whether you have the divestment or particular acquisition when you're into due diligence. Due diligence is I remember it as a very time-consuming, very granular exercise when I was part of a very large global organization with Maersk. There is just a lot to read in that data room. Now, today, you can load it all into an AI and start asking it relevant questions of what to look for. And it's massively going to reduce the time that I just think back 12 years ago. I'm just sitting there going through all of the PDF and Excel and Word file and PowerPoint, trying to understand how does that look in this country, where's the risk and where's the exposure. So I think there's just elements now that we can truly accelerate the pure computing power that we are getting at our fingertips.
Completely. The job of folks in HR who work on acquisition or divestiture diligence, right? When effectively you are cross-comparing, right? Other companies' information to your information, that is a perfect early job for AI, right? It's very doable now, and we can change the lives of those folks. I also loved how you're talking about elevating how we think about workforce planning. We have the computing power now with AI to do different things at the granular level, but the real goodness is in the higher level data flow, things that you talked about leaving the organization, but then you also talked about internal mobility, right? If you can understand the paths that folks follow moving job to job and how many folks will internally transfer from your organization, how many will you gain from other areas and where do you gain them from? Which areas of the organization feed other areas? That's the stuff you're talking about. And I love that you're encouraging us to get into that goodness versus down to the nitty gritty necessarily of this particular job at this particular level in this location on April 5th of 2027. Yeah. I will magically grow a candidate that will start on that day, right? That is not going to hold from plan to execution. Something will change. And so the benefit is operating at a higher level and elevating above it, I think.
One comment on that, I think also, I remember also years ago, you try to identify your employee value proposition. And it's more, if you've been part of that, you sit in a work group and you go, oh, there's the benefits. And of course, there's the compensation. But what about the career movement and the career growth and the opportunities in that? And how many do you expatriate and what's your rotation? And there's all of that in your workforce planning, and all that output is there to present to the colleagues and understand what is the value proposition for new joiner, instead of perhaps historically went a bit more on the marketing approach. Now we got much more facts to present to the candidate. This is what we offer, and we can easily condense the data. Something that took a long time historically to say, oh, how many do we even have for a rotation or an expatriation, and how often do people change jobs, and how many stick around for longer, and all of this. Like today, it's much easier to do an ad hoc analysis of something that's not already on your HR dashboard to present it for that particular case when you need it and with a very short delivery.
And probably because before AI, it was taking so many of us too long to just make sense of disparate data sources and that sort of thing to even get to basic line level reporting on headcount. And we now can just change the game, right? So don't apply AI on an old, bad process, right? Actually rethink what you can do with things. I could geek out all day about some of these topics. I'm going to go back a little bit to the comment about HR sawing the branch that it's sitting on. If you are right about that, and I tend to agree, what does HR need to build right now before this decision gets made for them?
I think the answer to that is going to be a little contextual compared to where you sit in the world right now. Right now, I sit in the US, and what I observe here, we spend a lot of time in lack of integrations between the different parts of what's HR, and particularly I'm saying benefits area. Right? We spend unrealistic long time managing data and processes between 401k and plan administrators and auditors. And we spend a long time between healthcare providers and vision plan providers and dental providers. And since we can't really get any of them to make a 5 or 10-year contract because we have to renegotiate and we have to do open enrollment every year, if I look at the time spent for me and my team over the course of a year, it's where we right now, even without AI, can we just get HR in a box? Does not matter as much as we think it does. You need to have a market relevant benefits plan. But we tend to tinker so much on that and have so many dialogue. And then when it's all done and we have the open enrollment, then still nothing flows. It just doesn't flow in an integrated way. And that's where benefits professionals right now, they should have that. And what we're doing now in ECCO, we're putting a lot of pressure on our vendors and vendor selection. So I'm not meeting with any vendor now without I ask them to present their AI roadmap, because that roadmap should drive our costs down year on year. And I don't understand why we accept that we still talk about 3-5% cost increases year on year. That's a vendor that doesn't have an AI roadmap. I think that's an area where we need to lean into, and we are also ourselves in HR seeing that as part of our identity. I understand why it's so hard, but I've also met HR professional where that's a whole identity. That's the only thing they can talk about. I think that's going to be tough because that identity should disappear. That shouldn't be there. Business leaders candidly don't care. It's not like they don't care that they have health insurance and 401k, but they don't care about how many thousands of hours we spend tinkering with that. They would rather reinvest those hours to something else, even performance conversation or talent conversation or higher discussion. So I think that's an area we need to, and we need every vendor that is out there to also lean into that. I have a feeling that someone's going to pop up. We don't even know the name of today, that they're going to disrupt this market. But right now, the most that I engage with, they're very much traditionalist, and I can change to another traditionalist and another traditionalist. There's got to be someone out there that says, I can save a few per year in corporate America by just providing a new automated one.
There are solutions coming our way in the next 12 months that we can't even think of today from where we are. And so being ready to embrace those as an HR team and holding our HR tech vendors to high standards, our benefits vendors, we spend so much money there. Jens, this has been an amazing conversation. So much depth here, right? We could probably build a whole show off of any one of these topics to really get into it and get people thinking. But I am going to pull us to the end to our lightning round. I like to hit guests with a handful of questions, just quick responses to leave folks with some stuff to think about. What is one AI tool that you've actually used in HR work this year?
Yeah, Copilot, like the advanced Copilot solution, completely accelerates communication and communication planning and messages. I think just a simple one, but I think it's there. That's it.
Perfect. What is one HR task you would hand to AI tomorrow without hesitation?
Onboarding. Everywhere I've been, someone is working on onboarding, but I don't think that there's that many ways you can do onboarding in an organization, and I don't think that it adds as much value as we.
All right. The HR decision that you personally would never hand to AI.
Governance and operating model. I think when you get up to that top of the food chain, is the decisions that governs your entire organization. You can be supported, but I wouldn't hand it.
Great. And what is one thing that your years in the military still shapes about how you lead?
I have luxury that I bounce that back and forth with my coach. I think there's a lot of resilience and like a tenacity, and I'm fairly quick to recover when I face adversity. Yeah.
Great skills to have, especially in an ever-evolving world and evolving organizations for sure. What is the best piece of advice that you would give our listeners from your years of doing turnarounds?
Always darkest before the dawn. And it's just because it doesn't appear to be working, you got to give it patience. The turnarounds, they are long haul, and they're tough and they're hard. And it's kind of like when you start thinking, we're going to give up here, that before you can see these brace yourself and don't give up, but also understand that it can be very tough working environment. But that doesn't mean it isn't working.
Thank you for that thought. And I always try, this was a hard one though, to get some takeaways because there were actually so many. So let's see how I did. I hope I actually don't have too many because I got a lot of notes while we were talking. I actually really latched onto your idea around your military background and your comment. You plan and then you pivot, right? So that resiliency being built in. And I just think also just naming that's something that we often stereotype about military being about rigor and structure only, but it is actually probably 30% the plan and 70% the ability to be resilient and pivot. So I liked that thought. I have a note here about you can do hard things with humanity, just how ECCO approached some restructuring differently in a greater and more team member forward way than you had to, given the laws in the US with at-will employment and how well received that was. And so just remembering that we don't have to follow the old playbook or follow the letter of the law exactly. If we want to do more and do better, there are ways to do that will be well received. I think the advice of it is HR's greatest opportunity to work yourself out of a job. That the advice you shared from the former colleague, where it has never led to bad outcomes for them, it leads to things like promotion. And to remember that even if working yourself out of a job in your current company doesn't lead you into a broader role in your own company, that role can and will exist in another company, especially in this age of early AI, right? If you can do it in one place, you can do it again in the next place. So get out in front of that. And then I said this a little bit already, but never spending more than 20 to 30% of time on the plan, because you do actually need 70% of your time for execution. That is just smart advice. But Jens, I always leave guests with the final word here. What is something that you would want listeners of the show today to think about on the rest of their drive home?
I think that they stay curious. Like, stay curious and ask questions. I think we all say it, like we forget it and we get too busy. So who is the person in the organization that you wanted to catch up with for a long time that you didn't? And if you think to this, oh, actually now is a good time to call her or him and saying, how's it going and what's happening in your part of the business? Even if nothing is happening, I tend to get wiser. They always bring me a new perspective. So I'll just encourage the listeners to reach out to that person that you wanted to catch up with.
Curiosity is never bad advice, I think. So thank you so much for joining me on the show today. This was a great conversation. I think our listeners are really going to love the episode.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on The Human Element, presented by Whisk. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow The Human Element wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Barb Bidan. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.